Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, your host, and I am super excited to be back and continuing on with part 2 of this episode. But first, let me just remind you to please like and subscribe to the podcast. That helps people find the podcast easier. And of course, I love seeing the reviews of the podcast. So this episode is just a continuation from part 1, where I was talking to Natasha England about her not yet transplant journey. We talked about a little bit about in the first part how she was a recovering alcoholic and she was needing a liver transplant, and her MELD score was extremely high. And she was listed for transplant, and because of her diet and her lifestyle change, her MELD score improved itself. So right now, we are continuing on with this story. It's a great story. So if you haven't heard part 1, please hit pause and go back and listen to the first part so you can catch up. And I'm just going to jump right in and continue right where we left off. So let's go ahead and just get right to it. So help me welcome again, or continued, Natasha England.
My nurse coordinator called me and she was just like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that we think you're too healthy to be listed for transplant anymore. And she's like, and that's not to say that it's not imminent, like it could still very much be a part of your future, but as of right now, I'm only 38. And she's like, so the longer you can live with your own liver, the better. Just because of the immunosuppressive medications. That was another thing that I've been really scared about, is because one of the things that had me hospitalized was they put me on prednisolone to try to help my liver. And within 4 days, I went into psychosis. And it was, it was absolutely terrifying. It was one of the scariest things I've been through. I mean, when my partner would come to the hospital, he'd go to leave, and I would just bawl and bawl. I thought that people were trying to kidnap me. I thought they were trying to sell me into sex trafficking. I thought I owed people all this money. I mean, it was just crazy, the things it was doing to my head.
Well, the good news about that is I'm sure that they had you on tons and tons of the prednisone, like a high
They
dose.
didn't.
Oh, they didn't.
Actually.
What was the
No.
dosage?
Oh, now I can't remember, but every time, and maybe I have it backwards. I want to say it was like 40 milligrams. Does that sound like
Well, that's not what I was talking about. Like usually when you go in for something, like sometimes you get what they call acute rejection, and they have to like 250 milligrams or whatever of
right,
of steroids.
right,
Typically transplant recipients who go along get their dosage lowered, right? So I started off
right.
at 20. I'm at 5 now, but
Right.
not unless you have something. I mean, it's different for everybody, but
For sure.
40 milligrams isn't what I was talking about. So I thought it was like a high dosage, like the 250 or whatever it is.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But
It,
some people can't handle the prednisone. And I've heard of way before my transplant, my doctor had told me that she had a patient that was court ordered that they couldn't take prednisone because he would get like so angry that he would like commit crimes or something. I can't remember all the
oh my
details.
gosh. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some people just can't do prednisone. But they have
Yeah.
other alternatives. Like I know some people who don't take it at all and have had
Uh-huh.
transplants. So
Well,
it just varies.
that's good to hear because I mean, even when I was talking to my team about that, um, just expressing my concern, especially my partner, he's the one that really remembers all of it. You know, obviously, since I was so out of it, I don't fully remember everything that happened, but he was like, you know, it was bad, like it was really bad, so we're really concerned about her having to take that, and you know, is there an alternative? And they told me, for me, and I don't know if it's just what they do on their end as a hospital or what the case is there, but they made it sound like there was not another option for the prednisone itself. Like I know that I would have to be on, you know, 4 different kinds of anti-rejection medications in the beginning. And they told me they'd get me off of that one as quickly as possible. And they're like, It's also entirely possible that the reason you had a reaction like that is because your liver was so just messed up that who knows, maybe with
Yeah.
a new liver, maybe after the transplant, like you'll be fine
Yeah.
and you won't have that type of reaction. But it was just kind of one of those we don't know till we
Yeah.
know
Well,
things.
for me, I know the transplant changed a lot of things about me. A lot of things that were I was sick with that wasn't related to transplant, I don't have anymore. So,
Wow.
I mean, it could affect you differently. I don't, everybody's different. And I'm not a doctor or anything. So
Right.
all I know is that I have a very good friend who's a liver recipient. She doesn't take prednisone. And I have a good friend who's a lung recipient and she doesn't take prednisone. And I will
Uh-huh.
also tell you that transplant teams are very inconsistent with each other. So you will
Right.
learn that one team says this and another team says that. And it could
Yep.
be even a doctor in your team says this and a doctor in your team says that. It's so it's really frustrating for me and a lot of other people that the inconsistencies are so much, but that's just the way that it is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing I see on these support groups on Facebook a lot too, is like, oh, well, my doctor told me the only things I couldn't eat post-transplant were X and Y.
Yeah.
But then you've got this other person where it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that everywhere. So it's there's like not a standard of care. It's just what the doctors believe, I guess. So I guess it's just you kind of have to figure out what your doctor wants and what works with you and
Right.
just kind of go with it. So luckily for me, I've been able to figure out what works for me and my doctors
Yeah.
have agreed. But
Yeah.
there's
And where
always
did you
another
have your
place. Oh,
you had
sorry.
yours in Houston? Is that
Houston.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Um,
there's 4 transplant centers in Houston alone.
wow.
So
Well, Houston's huge,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
but I can only imagine the back and forth and the variations and things that
Yeah.
could happen just
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And it's like they don't really work together, you know. Like there's like three different adult hospitals and they're just different. The way they do things are different. Like the way the things that they believe are different. So it's just something you'll get used to, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yep, it does seem that way for sure. It's not a perfected art.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Um,
after you heard that you were essentially too healthy for transplant, how did that make you feel? Like, were you like so relieved or were you like, well,
honestly, I I never even expected to hear those words come out of somebody's mouth
yeah,
because of how sick I was and how pretty much every appointment I had with my hepatologist, they were talking about how people that are as sick as I was, they just don't really turn full circle. And if they're going to, they would have done so by, before the time I was at. So I had just, for the past year, I'd been tunnel vision, like just I'm gonna die. It's just kind of a matter of when. Um, and that's, I guess, just kind of what I'm focusing on, like making sure that, I can get myself into a mindset where I leave letters for my daughter and where I try to take as many photos of the two of us as I can, stuff like that. Um, and so I just never expected to hear that. And when I did, it was like it was like, man, I should be s- hiking up Mount Olympus. It's one of the mountains nearby. I'm not just making that up. I should be like Mount Olympus right now, just like screaming from the top of it, like, oh my gosh, like look what I did. But it was really emotional, and it was just, I think it was just because I like I said, I'd been living with such tunnel vision for so long, and it was just such a like negative outlook, like I wanted to be a part of every single thing that my daughter was doing. Like even if I was just exhausted, I would push myself to go do whatever it was that she was doing because I didn't want to miss out. Um, and so I'd just been living with just this morbid outlook. And then it was almost like, I mean, I was talking to one of my therapists after, and she was like, you almost grieved, like you grieved once, right? And basically just took took it as it came at you and kind of had accepted the fact that you weren't going to be around, so you grieved in that way. And now you're almost grieving in a different way, like and I don't know, it's the way she worded it was so eloquent, and it made so much more sense than how I can say it. But I was emotional for like a good few weeks, and my partner, he's very calm and very like even keel, and just which is good for me because I'm like stress case
Yeah.
anxiety.
My husband's the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's good, but sometimes it's like, could
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
like, I don't know, freak out for a second or
Oh my God, I've said that to him so many times. That's funny because I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you do, even though it stinks.
Yeah.
Um, I I honestly I couldn't even like bring myself to tell him, because the second I'd start trying to tell him, I would just get so choked up that I was like, this isn't gonna work. Like
Yeah.
he's not gonna get it, because he just thinks that I should be on top of the mountain screaming and,
Yeah.
so excited. And it's not that I'm not overly thrilled, but at the same time, it's just I honestly I don't know how to put it into words. And I think maybe there's like a little bit of like survivor's guilt in a different way than some people feel,
Mhm.
having gotten a transplant because somebody else passed away, that, and it's, I'm sure that's a whole other level. But there's this part of me where it's like, how how did I make it through this? Like, I feel like I just heard so often that people in my situation that are as sick as I am, they just don't, they can't get out of it, like it's kind of too little too late.
Yeah.
Um, so it was just a whole mixture of emotions,
Yeah. Well,
gratitude, disbelief. I
yeah.
mean,
Did your doctors like tell you that this happened because of the lifestyle change that you made with all of the, the diet and the the mindset and all of that? Is that why
um,
it got better? Did they?
yeah, yeah. So my primary care provider, he also deals with substance abuse problems. I wish everybody had a doctor like him, because he's an internist, but he just knows, like, he could do the job of 15 doctors, I swear. But when I was talking to him about it a little bit, he was like, that 95% of you doing this well is you, right? He's like, sure, 5% of it was you listening to your doctors and taking guidance and all of that, but you're the one that put in the hard work. You're the one that did make all of those dietary changes, that did just really push yourself. So I haven't asked my hepatologist. It would be interesting to hear what my hepatologist has to say, as opposed to my my internist. And I see them again at the end of, or the beginning of March, um, which it's just a hepatologist now, that's not a doctor on a liver team, so that'll be kind of crazy. But to just even, when I first found out, they skipped a lot of the tests that they normally have done in the beginning, because it was just so blatantly obvious that I was cirrhotic. And so now, though, we're kind of working backwards, and now I'm having, like, I'd never had an MRI before. I'd only ever had CT scans. So I just had an MRI the other day, and it confirmed, like, I do still have cirrhosis, but it's I'm managing it well, with all of the changes that I've made. And then I have a fibro scan. I actually was trying to do this after I had my fibro scan, this podcast. I was hoping I'd have those results too, but we weren't scheduling out quite far enough. But at the end of February, I'll have a fiber scan done, which that'll be interesting to see what that has to say now. Um, so anyway, we'll kind of just see. I mean, they're on very strict orders, though. If I do have any decompensated events that start occurring again, that they're to, list me as soon as possible and to get me back seeing the liver team. Um, so that's comforting. It's not like they just delisted me and were like, okay, good luck, take care. Um,
Yeah, they gotta make sure they gotta do all the tests first, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. So, and then I just see a hepatologist regularly unless anything else comes up. And um I mean, it was another thing that made it kind of heart-wrenching in the beginning is with the liver, you can do the living donor, as you can with some other
Yeah.
organs as well. And my very best friend that I've had since kindergarten, she knew that she was a universal donor. And so like as soon as she found out that that was possible, she started doing all of the evaluation type stuff,
Yeah.
um, which that was emotional,
Yeah.
having somebody so willing to just go through something so big,
Yeah.
um, that can be life-saving, not just for me, but for my daughter. And
Yeah.
um so she was going through all of that, and she'd had her CT scan done, and they came back with the results, and I guess the blood vessel pattern in her liver isn't it wasn't a standard pattern. So they would have had to cut through a lot more blood vessels in order to do the transplant, which made it more likely for either of us, but especially her, to bleed out,
Mm.
um, or to experience blood clots. Um, so that very quickly,
Yeah.
you know, dwindled, and I know that she felt so bad about it because she really was trying to see it through. And um obviously my partner, if we didn't have a daughter, he'd see what his blood type was. But if something happened to both of us and she ended up with no
Yeah.
parents,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't want
It's
to do that either.
yeah.
So um one of my old cousins from a previous marriage, that my mom was married, and that's how we were cousins. And she's since been divorced, but they've offered to go through the evaluation too, and I'm not even related to them anymore. I mean, it's just that part to me is so crazy that people, there's some really good selfless people out there.
There is. And there's people who I've had a couple of them on the podcast who they just it's in their heart to just donate and they donate to complete strangers. And I think that's just the most selfless thing that you can do. It's an
No
amazing
kidding.
gift to give somebody. And if
Yeah,
I could do it, I would do it, you know.
right. I know.
Just because
I
I know what it
know that.
means, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
yeah,
I know. That is the one thing. It's like post transplant, I wish that we could somehow repay that, but that's part
yeah,
of it. We can't really pay that forward.
right, right.
So, um, but anyway, I've always wanted to, my mom's always said, like, oh, you should be a motivational speaker. I think you'd be so great at it. And, obviously, this is just a little chunk of my story. There's a lot more that goes into it. Um, but understandably so, there are so many derogatory things surrounding transplant because it's scary, it's heart-wrenching.
Yeah,
um I mean, it's just it's straight up scary.
yeah,
And
it is.
yeah, and the fact that, like, I got so close, and like I said, it could still happen, and I've asked what could push me to needing it again, and they're like, well, anything that disrupts your baseline enough, it could be stress, it could be you get the flu real bad
Mm,
one year. I mean, it can be so many different little things that to one person, they just fight through it, but it
right,
takes me down.
right. And I think that part of it is just something that can't be controlled as long as you
Exactly.
are working on what you can work on, which is what sounds like you have been doing, and that's benefited you tremendously. As long
Mm-hmm.
as you keep doing that, then the rest of it, you can't control it. So
Exactly.
what
You'll worry
I
yourself
would,
to
yeah. So what I would say to people is just do what you can now and live your life now and worry
yeah,
about later when later happens, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I mean, I can even say that just with that tunnel vision that I had on, because I could have, rather than living in just this bubble of fear and doom, I could have been experiencing um my daughter's earlier years in a much better mindset than I did, because I was just so focused. I was future tripping is what they
Yeah.
call it, um in like rehab and things like that. I was future tripping, uh instead of being present and mindful and being in the moment. I was focused on something that obviously didn't need to be. It was a big waste of energy at the time, you
Yeah.
know, and I don't want to say waste of energy, but um, I could have tried to have a much better outlook. And like you just said, live the best you can now and do what you can now and take later when it
Right.
comes, and when you can actually make educated decisions. Or
Yeah. Well, and now you know that, and now you can focus on now. And
yeah,
so, I mean,
yeah,
at least you're still here and you're still able to do that now. So,
yes.
and I think that's fantastic that you're doing so great. And, you know, I have a question I want to ask you, but and you've kind of already answered it a few times, but um I will say that um a lot of people who are in your situation probably wouldn't have and probably didn't take the time to research what you researched and try to better themselves. They probably just gave in to I need a transplant. I'm done. And you worked really hard to get healthy. And I think that's
Mhm.
probably why you're doing so well now. So I just want to commend you on that. But
Well,
my question for you, and I ask all my guests, and I'm sure you've heard, is if you could give, well, let's see, you're pre-transplant. So if you could give
I
somebody who
yeah,
is going through what you were going through some advice that you wish that you had known, what would that be other than what you've already said a few times?
right.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, they say knowledge is power, and just so much as knowledge being power, uh, mindset is power. Um, my dad used to always say that happiness was a state of mind. Um, and I feel like I kind of lost sight of that. And don't get me wrong, like I had my days where I was at my rock bottom, where I just wanted to be sad. I just wanted to cry. I just wanted to be miserable. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And it's understandable that everybody has those days going through something like this. But um you can also try to choose to find whatever it might be to bring you happiness. I lost sight of a lot of those things. Like nature has always brought me joy. Whether it's just driving up the canyon or, wherever your surroundings are, just driving somewhere that's beautiful and appreciating the beauty that's around you. Because sometimes it feels like that's all you might have is just the beauty that's surrounding you. Um, and to try to, I guess, really let that seep in, uh, and not you. I feel like it's so easy to, for me, at least, beat yourself up over beat myself up over things that I did, uh that kind of created this bed for myself. I even had people say to me, well, you seem like you're handling it well. And I'd be like, well, I made this bed for myself. Now I have to lay in it. Like these are my consequences. It's not that way for everybody. And uh I know there's a lot of um oh, what I feel like you would be able to pick the word I'm trying to think of. There's a lot of there's like a stigma around people that damage their liver enough from alcohol or drugs or whatever, and why should they get transplants, and I could have gotten hung up on that too. But I and I've kind of been this way since I was little. Your reason why I can't is going to be the reason I show you you're wrong, type of thing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, like I try to use that, channel that in a way that's going to benefit me and hopefully benefit others. That's why I wanted to get on here too, is not because I want to rub it in anybody's faces like, oh, look how terribly I was doing and now look at me now. It's more, I want people to know that anything's possible and that a lot of it can start with mindset, I guess, to circle back around to answer your
Yeah.
question. Um, I spent a lot of time in the beginning with a terrible mindset, and I could have done something a lot better um, with all that energy that I put into that terrible mindset.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if that answered your question or if I just blabbered a whole bunch.
No, it did answer it. And I think it was a great answer. And um I think a lot of people have their own opinions on, you know, who gets a transplant, who shouldn't get a transplant. And
Yeah,
what I say to those people is it it's not about that. It's not about how you got there. It's the fact that you're there now, and it's what you need and what you
right.
deserve. And I feel like those people who think that way, they're just, I don't know, it depends on their situation, but maybe some are just saying that because they are still waiting for one and they're upset that they're not getting one, or I don't know, maybe they're just negative or whatever. But I would
Yeah,
say to you and everybody else, just don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. And I don't think that you do.
yeah,
But I think that your story, I think that your story will give a lot of people maybe hope, or maybe change their mind and change their mindset. And maybe if they do what you did, might not help them the way that it helped you, it'll
mhm,
still be beneficial if they do change, have that lifestyle change. I think everybody should have that lifestyle change regardless of your need a transplant or not. So I
right.
think that you have a fantastic story. And I think that you coming on this podcast was amazing, because I think a lot of people will hear you, and hopefully a lot of pre-transplant will hear you, and even post, maybe they'll start changing their mindset or changing the way that they, you know, live, or change their diet, or change, research. Or so everything that you had to say today, I think was valuable and inspirational. So
Thank you. And one thing I do want to add to about the researching part is be mindful about how you ask questions when you go to the internet,
right.
because
Yes.
how you word your question, you're going to find an answer that's geared toward answering it in that way. Um, so, and I say that because I've got some family members where they ask it in a specific way, so they find these answers to support the way they asked the question, and you've got to ask it objectively,
Yeah.
um remove any bias or anything like that. Just play dumb.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. I
And
agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and just pay attention to to where you're getting your information as
Right.
well, and never take the internet as 100% true, because anybody can be anybody on the internet.
Right.
And
Right.
so, always take it to the next level, take it to your doctor, take it to whomever you need to if there's something that you're like, wait, why? Because and I don't know, maybe there's some truth to this, but I saw somebody posting something about how drinking ice water can damage your liver. And
Right.
then,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah,
gotta, yeah, not, well, it was on the internet, so that's true. So stop
right,
drinking ice water.
right.
Everybody stop drinking ice water.
Every exactly. And
Just
then
kidding.
he
Don't do that.
cited the website, and I was like, that is not a good website.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, just be careful what you also research.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And I would like for you to come back on in 6 months or a year, and if you want
Yeah,
to, and
I'd
give
love
us an
to.
update on how you're doing, because I'm gonna
I'd
want to
love
know,
to.
and I know everybody else is gonna want to know. So
Yeah, I would love to, because I just had labs done a couple days ago, and I'm now down to an 8 on my MELD score.
wow,
So
that's fantastic.
yeah, I mean, it's still happening. It's still crazy, but
Yeah,
who knows what could happen in 6 months. But regardless of whether it's good news or bad news, like I said to you in the beginning, I try to be an open book, because you never know who it could affect, or how it might affect, or how it might touch somebody. But yeah, I'd love to stay in touch and come back on when we can work it out.
fantastic. Okay,
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jenny. It was so nice to meet you. And yeah, we'll just be in touch in a while.
okay, you too. Stay healthy.
All right. You too.
Bye bye.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.